Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello, and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by Associate Literary Agent Maddy Belton. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here.
How's it going? We're at the end of the year. Is that a busy time for you and the team?
Yeah, it's really busy. Also kind of my first year at Maddy Belton, so it's been a wild ride. I'm trying to kind of slow things down a little bit at this point. But yeah, it's been a really busy autumn. So
you started last 2022 at Maddy Belton?
Yeah, September 2022.
Oh, okay. So it's just over a year. You've had your annual anniversary.
Yes. Yeah. They gave me a big balloon. And by they, I mean Chloe.
You're an associate agent now. Did you start as an associate agent?
So I started at Maddy Belton as an associate agent, but I was previously agenting at a much smaller, more boutique literary agency that specialized in nonfiction. But obviously where I changed area, I came in at associate level so that I could learn a little bit more about the fiction process, because I'd only been doing nonfiction up to this point. So, yes.
Was that, how did you go, because you did English literature and art history at university.
I did.
How did you go from there to here, I guess?
I guess I graduated and was like, oh God, I have to fill my days. And I have always loved books, like so many people in publishing, and books are kind of the only thing I thought about and the only thing I could see myself going into. So when I came out of uni, I was like, okay, publishing. This makes sense. These look like my people. I love books and I can talk about them. Let's see what kind of a job in this sector might look like. So I applied really broadly and didn't get anywhere, as is often the way in publishing, because I just think there's so many people who want to do it. I joined the SYP and some various like Twitter pages and Instagram pages and kind of just got my feelers out. I went to a couple of events, I think just, more general book industry events. I think some by the Book Machine, some by the SYP, book clubs, anything to kind of just get myself into the sphere of publishing, even if it wasn't directly a publishing job yet. And then I sent cold emails to anyone and everyone who would listen. And that was demoralizing. But I did eventually hear back from Graham Moore Christie, which is a small boutique nonfiction literary agency who are probably most famous for Vex King and Raina Wynn. I got an internship there. I went and interviewed with Jane and Jen, who are the agents that run there. And I sort of worked really hard until they couldn't get rid of me. And they offered me a job after I'd helped them out at a London book fair. And it just sort of went from there, yeah.
Okay, so it was really a case of just kind of throwing yourself at every opportunity you could find and just really getting involved within the industry.
Persistence, persistence, like a little bit of gumption and a lot of luck. And I think I was lucky in a lot of ways, because I think that my personality lends itself quite well to agenting. And I think I was really lucky to kind of, and I know I was really lucky to sort of get a foot in the door at an agency. And Jane and Jen were very sweet and nurturing and wise. They listened to my opinion, which was a really magical thing for someone who is, I don't like, you go into these things, what good could I be? But actually they did ask what I thought about books and how I would pitch them. And even if sometimes I was way off, they allowed me to be quite involved in that process, which gave me a degree of independence that I think you need as an agent. And they kind of, allowed me to fall on my feet sometimes as well. And it was a very nurturing environment in that way, which was really fun.
Did you build any kind of list while you were there, or was that something you started later?
So I did, yeah. So I was an intern, and then I was an assistant, and then they did eventually promote me to agent there as well. And I did build a list, a small one, because I wasn't there for a very long time. I sold some amazing children's books from the Black curriculum. I sold, among other things, I sold a book by Ruth Allen, who is a geotherapist, I think is the official term. And we did her first book while I was at GMC, that was kind of like a coffee table book with like beautiful, beautiful text called Grounded. And then I also sold, while I was there, with Jane, her following book, which I think is coming out next year, which is called Weathering. And it's beautiful. It's about, so she is a therapist and a geologist, a previous geologist. And she uses sort of rocks as a metaphor for like human understanding, and looks at the ways that nature can provide us with systems and structures that might be beneficial to the way that like we see the world. And it's just such a beautiful book. I've got a copy, I've got a proof, and I'm going to read it because it's kind of the last book I worked on before I left GMC.
Oh, okay.
And I loved it.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
So does that mean that list stayed at the old agency? You didn't take any of those authors on with you? Okay. This was obviously, it's all nonfiction.
Yes.
But now, am I right in thinking that your focus is almost entirely sci-fi and fantasy?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's kind of like 90-10 on the sort of magic to non-magic. And yeah, essentially that I was looking to move, I think, into a space that would allow me to make magic without sounding twee. I have always been a huge reader of all books, but I think like gun to my head, fantasy and romance are sort of where my heart is. And that is also where I found myself being more and more drawn to. It's taken off in a really cool way. I mean, it's always been there. I think that's what we are all sort of coming to terms with as well. There's like a canon of some kind that's existed that I've been reading. I think with TikTok and with the generation that's coming through now and this like demand for escapism, it's just happening in such a big way. And I really wanted to be part of that. And I also, it's interesting. I don't know if other people have this when they're kind of going up through publishing. I think I had a very unique route to where I am because I didn't have very many colleagues at Graham Moore Christie. It was, for the most part, Jane, Jen, and myself. And we had some interns and various other things. So what I really also wanted was a few more peers and some other people who might like fantasy to talk about fantasy with. So it was much like a social move as it was also a move into somewhere where I could sort of do these magical books. So it was about broadening what I could do and the scope of the things I wanted to do. Yeah.
You wanted to kind of move into a bigger system where there's kind of more moving parts and more things going on. And
and that. Also fiction primarily. You know. Yeah.
And is it you do children's and adult, the whole kind of suite?
I do. Yeah, it's funny the markets, especially in science fiction and fantasy, is more and more blurred every day, I feel.
Yeah.
Yes, I love sort of, your Catherine Rundell type and Philip Pullman type middle grade. But I would say my taste generally skews older into kind of crossover and through to adult.
Yeah. But I think so much of, I read a lot of fantasy, and like when you look at like what's really popular on like a global level, so much of it is what we call crossover, I think, where it's like this could be YA, but you could also, it's also like Brandon Sanderson is it's like both, and like Name of the Wind is, I would say, is crossover as well. It's one of those genres where it's so blurred, it's hard to.
It's also really interesting, and I think I say this with an understanding that things are changing, but I do think for a time a lot of women published into the fantasy space were held as YA more so than men. And I think that has an impact on kind of the way that we saw those categories. Whereas I think now there is understanding, there's some incredible editors, and there's just a lot more movement and a lot more of this sense that the publishing industry likes to categorize. And it's useful for them in so many ways, like data weight, all those things. But the consumer is less bothered most of the time.
Yeah.
Especially when they're buying their own books. In the middle grade market, when a parent is purchasing and some younger YA, that you can have a bit more what's appropriate, etc. But a teenager looking for Fourth Wing is not caring too much about which section it's in the bookshop for.
True. Or, someone's read a Brandon Sanderson. It's like Brandon Sanderson has stuff which is categorized as YA, but also stuff categorized as adult. But people just want to read Brandon Sanderson.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care where it is.
Yeah, and I love Sanderson. He sort of cemented my love of fantasy, I think.
And he will not stop. He's putting way too many books out all the time.
He is wildly and terrifyingly productive, but I think he's also really smart. He's been doing it for such a long time. And I think he continues to adapt and change, and that's also quite exciting.
And learn. I think there's something which is, and I'm sure he's open about this as well, is that reading something like Mistborn and Elantris, his earlier stuff, you can see how much he's honed the craft when you read the newer stuff, the later stuff, and it's you can see his kind of growth as well. Yeah,
it's really exciting in that way.
Indeed. So you said it's about a 90-10 split. Is that in terms of, we're talking sci-fi fantasy, is that in terms of 10% 10% sci-fi, 90% fantasy, or just across both?
No, the 10% I would say is more just other things. Sort of it's 90% sci-fi and fantasy, and 10% where my gut or instinct or particular passion takes me. So it could be non-fiction project, or I just reserve that 10% for my wild cards, because I think as an agent, one of the best things about being an agent is you're really led by your taste, right? And for the most part, I'm fairly predictable in what I like, but I know myself, and I think I do have this 10% that's I really like that book, and I want to sell that book because I think it's really, really cool. So I'm going to offer up on this book, even though it might not be a something you would immediately associate with me. Or again, that 10% would also be sort of inspiring nonfiction for children. So covers that.
So you do sort of keep up a little bit of your roots in nonfiction. You do have some nonfiction there. Yeah,
it's hard to let go completely.
That's good. Well, speaking about science fiction fantasy, we kind of covered it a little bit just now when you were saying it's become a much more kind of broad thing than it was historically. And I think also historically, if it was deemed fantasy, it was just put in as a children's book. Lord of the Rings used to be considered a children's book, and even Philip Pullman. I mean, I would argue if Lyra is 3 or 4 years older, that's YA through and through. Within fantasy, sci-fi, the range, nowadays we have, you've got your epic fantasy, but you've also got cozy fantasy, grimdark, romantasy, mythology, historical, contemporary. The list goes on. Do you rep all of it, or are there some kind of sections of that you aren't really that drawn into?
I rep all of it. I have the ability to rep all of it. I don't have everything on that list yet. I hope to eventually, in my time as an agent. But I mean, my remit is really broad, and as I said, it is really directed by what I enjoy to read, and I enjoy all of those things. I probably I like grimdark, but I'm not the biggest fan of grimdark. I think I would want something with a little bit of a twist or something like that. I also think but it depends. Again, I don't want to say I don't want it, because I do. Yeah. It just has to be the right one,
Yeah, I know what you mean, because grimdark's an interesting one too, because you go to the origin of it, and the origin of it, I think, it's Warhammer, I think. And that's very serious, and that's where the kind of it's all the kind of vibe and the tone of it. But then you get something like Joe Abercrombie, which is grimdark, but it's also hilarious and it's like
So
really fun, right? So it's even the range within that sort of smaller genre of the meta genre fantasy is, gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, in many ways, if you start talking about fantasy, you're talking about infinite worlds and space and time, and any contrived magic you can dream up. So it is incredibly broad. I love it all, but I'm obviously driven by the market and driven by personal taste, and I think most agents are in that way.
I mean, you have to be. It is also a business at the end of the day.
Yeah,
this is work, and you need to be taking stuff that you think has a good chance of succeeding.
Of course, yeah.
And you owe that to the authors as well.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you're very much into magic. Do you rep the non-magical, more sciencey sci-fi stuff?
Not so much, which isn't to say I wouldn't. I'm not really a thriller girl. So anything that is kind of like a sci-fi thriller, I am not as naturally drawn to. But I am also really into like very complicated characters. And I sometimes think if the characters are good, then I would go there. But generally, I steer away from the kind of Blake Crouch space a little bit.
Okay. That's good to know. So now that we've established what it is that you represent, what you're looking for, what you're interested in, let's talk about submissions. This is something I ask all the agents that come on. For submissions at Madeleine Milburn, you guys actually have a form system now, which is like built into the website, very convenient. I'm sure it's great for your email inboxes, but nothing too surprising. It's kind of the industry standard cover letter synopsis, first 3 chapters, 10,000 words for fiction. So, of the cover letter, synopsis, and chapters, where do you go first, and what are you looking for with each part?
Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
So always the cover letter. Arguably, the subject line. It's got to have a good title. And then in terms of the cover letter, I want to be able to scan it fairly quickly and pick out comparative books that I love and know or that are exciting at the moment, a little bit about you, and a little bit about how the book is going to make me feel. Because I'm very much a mood reader, and I think I'm quite driven by that. So those are sort of the top lines, and then if the things are present, then I will read that in a little bit. I will like refocus on that, and sort of read it a bit more deeply, and then dip into kind of the first few pages, get a sense of the voice. If all's still going well, I won't finish the sample. I'll jump into the synopsis and make sure it's kind of fully formed, and then I will probably send it to my Kindle or put it in a folder to kind of read in a bit more detail on a quiet moment and kind of sit with. And then if it all goes well, I will call in the manuscript.
That's interesting. That seems like you've got a real method and a real like system for this.
You have to be really methodical about it because you just get so many.
Yeah.
You know, we're all going through those submissions looking for the specific things that, you know, spark excitement in us as agents and as people.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the cover letter that so you want to know how you're going to feel, or at least how they think the words are going to make you feel. What can you just give like an example of that? That's not something I'd kind of heard before as a suggestion for a cover letter.
I'm a very emotional reader. I think what I mean by that is the narrative arc and what's at stake.
Right.
Often with fantasy, or always with fantasy, and most of the time with pretty much any book, like you're looking for a clear, like, what's the status quo? How is it being changed? And what are the consequences of that? And I think if you can get that across to me in a blurb, like that's how I try and pitch things. And so if I can pick those things out of your sort of blurb that you've written or your cover or synopsis of the book itself, then I know I'm onto a winner, because those are the kind of things that readers will latch onto. Is it a love story? Is it about belonging? Obviously it's about a world ending like magical curse or something like that.
Yeah.
But when you break it down, like, is this about found family? Is this a quest narrative? Is this a werewolf book that's about, changing and what that means and that kind of thing? I'm looking for those broad strokes that have the depth that I like to work with.
Okay. And presumably if there's like a sort of overarching vibe of the, so like if it's
it's a vibe check. It's a good way of looking at it.
Like if it's a cozy fantasy, you'd be like,
exactly,
let me know it's cozy.
In the pitch events where there's often a mood board attached to a pitch, I'm sort of, when I'm looking at that cover letter, I'm building that mood board in my head.
Okay.
So it's about the images, the vibe, the mood. Is it dark? Is it light? Is it cozy? Is it romantic? Is it gory? Like all those things. I need to be able to get them quite quickly.
Right.
And often I can, and which is really fun. Like, I think one thing I will also say about submissions is, even in the year that I've been looking at fiction submissions at Maddy Belton, they get better. I think people have really started to nail their pitching, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I've heard the standard of not just the submissions and the queries themselves, but just like writing in general has gone up sort of exponentially. Almost every year, I guess it goes up. Yeah,
which is so cool.
Worrying for all the people wanting to break into the industry when it's like, competition's much harder than it was last year.
It is. But equally, a good story will always win. And it's more art than science. Like, there's no exact formula for success at any stage, I don't think. There's just what you love and what the reader loves. And I think if you can put that on a page, then you're onto a winner. Yeah.
And just like with you and getting into publishing, it's about perseverance and just kind of keeping going despite, all the sort of ups and downs.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
So that's fiction. You do, as you say, represent a small portion that sometimes is non-fiction. Slightly different thing to pitch. It's outlines and chapter samples. Am I right in thinking there's sort of more emphasis on the author with a non-fiction and like their connection and qualifications in relation to whatever the book is going to be about?
So it sort of depends. It's contextual, but I would say it depends more on the justification of why the idea needs to go to market and who is looking for that book. I think with nonfiction, you have to think about there being a need for the book to fill, and justifying that need is the key to selling that book. So more so than like the text, whereas in fiction, like that text being able to carry the reader is really strong reasoning. In nonfiction, it is more about whether or not the person writing the book is the right person to fill the gap in the market, and how that gap will be served by this book. Okay,
that's interesting. So there's almost, I mean, you have to think about your audience and where this sits on a shelf no matter what, but it seems like with nonfiction, there's almost a much bigger sort of like, you need to know exactly the kind of demographics that this is for. And
exactly.
Where it's going.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very much about, as I said, fulfilling a need. And particularly like in children's nonfiction, which is the only kind I do now. It's about kind of like, what is that parent looking for when they're going into the bookshop and trying to kind of find something that's going to support their child's learning. And, one of the simplest ways of thinking about that is they're looking for something that will complement what they're learning in school.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
So like, look at the curriculum and then maybe what's not in the curriculum, but like might be adjacent to it. Like that would be a really cool thing to have a book on.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Okay, that's a whole market and writing that I've never even thought and not even considered.
Yeah, which is really fun, and also like again, things that parents find hard to explain. That it really depends on the parent there. But for example, if I was a parent I would probably be looking for science and maths books for my children, because those are the things that I struggled with at school the most.
Right.
And that I myself, or my parents when I was younger, would like get me books on those subjects, help me get more interested. So you've got sort of that side of it, and then you've also got the like really kid that's like done all the schoolwork, really excited about space, for example, and just wants to consume more than the teacher's able to provide them. So the parent wants something that's going to, you know, excite their curiosity, take them to the next level in that way.
Oh, that's great. That's inspirational, I would say. That's great. I really like that. And I guess there's also when you're talking about, you know, if a parent struggles themselves to explain a certain subject, they get a book that does that, but they can also learn with their child. They can get a kind of grip on it at the same time. That's great.
And I think as well, there is only so much time a teacher in a classroom has to explain things. And there is only so much that is in the national curriculum. And there are gaps. And so it's also about like diversifying learning and making sure that everyone sees themselves in history and science and all those things, and English as well.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. It's not something I'd ever really thought about before, but makes a lot of sense. Let's get back onto you as we head towards the twilight of the episode. We are recording this. It's near the end of the year 2023. In 2024, are there any specific genres or characters or settings or styles that you are really hoping to see in your submissions box?
Yes, always. I have not yet found, but really want a vampire or a werewolf book.
Okay.
Could be both at once. I'm not that, you know, I just want it to be dark and bloody, a little bit sexy. I want it to explore like monsters and, you know, monstrousness in a YA setting. I think it could be really cool in the vein of kind of growing up and what that means as you grow up, to be growing up into a vampire or werewolf, or to be dealing with that at times when you're having to deal with a lot. In the adult space, it would be really cool to see a real urban twist on those things, like give me corporate vampires. You know, that kind of thing, I think could be really cool. And like, you know, really gothic imagery and visuals. So that's definitely on my list.
Literal corporate vampires.
Literal corporate vampires, please. But truly anything shifter or vampire, love. And I really love that also if you are so that way inclined. Like I love that in the romance space as well, like paranormal romance. I love paranormal romance, and I used to read it a lot when I was growing up. I think it's really making a comeback, so I would love some like quite romantic things in that space too. But I'm not limited to them. I also just like them in other ways. I also really always love epic fantasy, both YA and adult. I feel like that is like my favorite thing. It's what I read the most of. And with epics, what I am always most drawn to are the kind of the way that magic impacts the way worlds are built and fall, and who gets left behind and who tells the stories of empires, kingdoms, universes that rise and fall with time. So that kind of scope is really interesting to me. And how do you convey that both on a massive scale with your world building, but also in that like gorgeous intimate scale? And like, how does that affect Joanna, the village librarian that, you know, had to sweep up the ashes of all the books that were burnt in the war? Like that kind of thing, like the micro and the macro and how they intersect is like my heartland. I love it.
Okay, so you must really like the Stormlight Archives.
Yes, I love the Stormlight Archives. I love them a lot. Yeah.
I'm just thinking the first one, The Way of Kings, that there's like 2 prologues and you're getting sort of narrated by like basically gods and then like kings and like it's constantly shifting.
Exactly. I love that. And then also dragons.
Nice.
Still haven't found my dragon book, but I like love dragons, and dragons in middle grade as well. All the like through any genre, dragons, please. Huge like dragon girl.
Dragons could be hard at the moment, I guess, because
I know
House of the Dragon is like such a big
Yeah.
impact.
But they are also perennial, and like Christopher Paolini's, is that how you say his name? I hope so. His
Aragon,
series was Aragon.
Yeah.
I read that when I was in school when I was really young. It was my first ever epic fantasy. It was my entry point into the genre. And it, there will always be kind of I hold a very sweet spot in my heart for it. And that kind of book I really, really love. And it doesn't really go out of fashion. Like, trends come and go, but everyone loves a dragon.
Yeah.
Especially now.
Especially now, yeah. Dragons don't really go out of fashion. They just kind of, fashion around them changes. So like House of the Dragon has made them kind of like these terrifying ancient beasts that some people can train and stuff, whereas like other things have them as more friendly. It varies.
There's loads of ways to do it, and I'm open to them all.
And there could be more.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd love to see kind of, and we've had it a little bit, Sulin Tan has written some beautiful books, The Heart of the Sun Warrior, and I think she's got more Tales from the Cecil Kingdom coming. And I really love like dragons also in, like from other mythologies and like in other canons. Like we know the Western dragon quite well, but many other cultures have their version of a dragon, and it would be cool to see that.
It's funny that so many different cultures across the world have like a version of what is a dragon.
Yeah,
I guess
I think human beings would just always want to fly, don't they? Really?
We want to fly on like giant, scaly things that breathe fire.
Exactly.
Amazing. Before we get on to the final question, always love to ask agents this. Obviously, with your colleague Chloe, we know the answer, but safe to say that you love books, stories, literature. Would you or are you writing a manuscript of your own? Would you like to publish something of your own one day?
Gosh, this is a question I've been wrestling with recently, actually. I never necessarily grew up wanting to write. I grew up wanting to read, and I have always defined myself in terms of like my work as more of an architect than a builder.
Okay, it's interesting.
So, short answer, no. I much prefer moving parts of other people's stories. Yeah. But I did draft the synopsis of something the other day because I was just looking for something in my subs that I couldn't find. So who knows? I don't know. It's not something like maybe one day, but it's not a priority for me at the moment, and I'm not currently writing a manuscript. No.
Okay, so it's a never say never kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And are you, just off the back of that, are you quite an editorial agent with your authors? Do you like to sort of get involved and brainstorm with them and do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I love to do that. I love to do that. It's like one of the most fun things about my job. It's also something I talk to people a lot when I'm offering rep, kind of my vision for the book and whether they want to kind of do the work. Every book is different. But yeah, I think it's a dialogue, editing, and bringing ideas to the table is a service that I hope I offer as an agent, and something that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, amazing. Awesome. Well, I think this has been, for anyone listening, if they wanted to get a sense of you and what you're into and what you're interested in as an agent, I think this has been a great demonstration of that. And we are now at what is always the final question of every episode, which is, Maddy, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you want it to be?
I think it would be Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, because it is to date the only book that I've read more than 3 times.
Wow.
I'm not really a big rereader. Yeah, but I do return to that one quite regularly, and it has epicness, it has a love story, it has gods, and I really like it. I will say, I know this is cheating, but I did want to say the Live Ship trilogy by Robin Hobb, because I've never managed to finish it, and I'm desperate to, but I just never find the time. But that is 3 books, and I couldn't just take one of those books. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'd have to take the full set. So that's like my bonus answer.
Okay.
Because I love Robin Hobb, and I haven't read that trilogy. Yeah.
She's
but yes.
prolific as well. She's written so much.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, great choices. Song of Achilles is probably a modern classic. I would guess. I would guess it'll get put into those hallowed halls relatively soon.
I hope so.
But a great choice. I think the first person to choose Song of Achilles. So.
Oh really? Oh,
yeah,
I
nice
thought
one.
that was quite a generic answer, but I'm pleased.
No. The most often picked is almost any Jane Austen.
I'm not a big Jane Austen. No.
We found it, guys. The Jane Austen hater.
I know. I don't hate her. I really love Pride and Prejudice, the film, in every iteration. But the only Jane Austen I've actually managed to read is Emma.
Okay, and you didn't love it.
It was fine.
Well, to each his own, you know. That's
yeah, exactly.
You're entitled
not enough magic
to...
for me, Jamie.
There you go. That's
not
the
enough
issue.
Dragons.
Yeah. She just needed a bit of magic and a bit of otherworldly
a dragon
stuff.
or two. And
what about? Did you ever watch that Pride and Prejudice and Zombies?
Oh, do you know I didn't? But I reckon I would like that.
It's very silly.
Yeah, I like a bit of silliness. So that's okay.
So you'd be interested in a magical retelling of a Jane Austen?
Yes, but I wouldn't know if I'm the best person for it because I don't know the original material well enough necessarily.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe that would be a good
kind
thing.
of... Maybe. I don't know. It would depend on the execution, as it often does.
Anyway, we're going off on wild tangents.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Maddy, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your kind of career so far, what you're doing, what you're up to at Madeleine Milburn, what you're interested in, and kind of all of the stuff that goes with your literary agenting. It's been awesome chatting with you. Thanks so much, Jamie. And for anyone wanting to keep up with what Maddy is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at MadsPhyllis. That's MadsPhyllis, or on Instagram at Maddy Belton. If you're thinking about subbing to Maddy or any of the team over at Madeleine Milburn, head over to the website and you can find their submission form process on there. And to make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow along on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can support the show on Patreon, and for more bookish chat, check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Maddy, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you Fargo? You can in the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.